Have you ever witnessed a single moment so charged with tension that an entire room seemed to freeze in time? Imagine a grand ballroom, glittering chandeliers suspended overhead, the finest cutlery gleaming on tables draped in silk. The city's most influential guests mingle with reserved airs, a sense of luxury and power swirling in the atmosphere. Then, in the midst of polite smiles and hushed conversations, a wealthy magnate explodes in fury at a humble waitress accusing belittling shouting. Suddenly she responds with one simple remark, and everything stops. In that electrified silence, buried secrets, years of heartbreak, and astonishing revelations unfold. The event was the annual holiday fundraising dinner for the Helios Children's Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing life-saving medical care and educational opportunities to underprivileged children across the globe. The venue, the ballroom of the Grand Solera Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, an opulent space with gilded columns, plush red carpeting, and vintage chandeliers that sparkled like captured starlight. Each year, this foundation held a lavish banquet to celebrate the generosity of its benefactors. This particular evening was no exception. The room buzzed with an air of anticipation and self-importance. Philanthropists, celebrities, and CEOs from across the country were in attendance wearing elegant evening dresses and perfectly tailored suits. At a circular table near the raised stage sat Bill Gates, who sometimes joined these gatherings as an honored guest. Not far away was Elijah Rutherford, a lesser-known but extremely wealthy entrepreneur who had built a small empire of tech startups almost overnight. People claimed Rutherford was on track to rival the biggest names in Silicon Valley. The night was about more than money and status, though it was impossible to ignore their presence. The dinner was an opportunity to expand networks and forge alliances with the influential. The press invited specifically for coverage clicked photos from the periphery. Waitstaff bustled discreetly, balancing silver trays laden with appetizers, bacon-wrapped scallops, wild mushroom tartlets, and canapes drizzled with truffle oil. At precisely 7 o'clock, the large, ornate doors of the ballroom opened to admit the final guests. Among them was Charles Harrington, rumored to be worth over $500 million. Harrington was known for his philanthropic gestures. He had donated millions to the foundation over the years. Yet, as was whispered behind closed doors, his generosity often came with a measure of pride and an expectation of preferential treatment. The evening schedule called for a cocktail hour, followed by dinner and a series of heartfelt speeches about the children helped by the foundation. The host for the evening, an esteemed broadcaster with a mellifluous voice, was already at the podium greeting guests as they settled into their seats. Standing behind the scenes was Linda Parker, a young waitress employed by the Grand Solera Hotel for just under 6 months. She had been specifically chosen for this event because of her calm demeanor and attention to detail. Linda wore the standard uniform, a crisp white shirt, black slacks, and a black vest. She carefully balanced a tray of sparkling champagne flutes, her fingers steady despite the weight of the glasses. Though she appeared collected, Linda's mind churned beneath the surface. Bills were piling up at home. She had her younger sister to care for. She also still wrestled with shadows from a painful past, one she rarely spoke of. Unbeknownst to anyone in the room, Linda would soon face an ordeal that would not only lay bare her own story, but also strip away the polished veneer of the wealthy benefactors in attendance. By night's end, old assumptions would be turned upside down. Alliances would shift, and a single word from Linda would plunge the entire ballroom into stunned silence. Linda Parker had grown up in a modest home in upstate New York. Her father, Joseph Parker, had been a dedicated postal worker who instilled values of perseverance and kindness. Her mother, Catherine, was once an aspiring writer who found quiet joy in short stories and poems scribbled on scraps of paper late at night. Tragically, Catherine's life was cut short by cancer when Linda was only 12, leaving Joseph to raise Linda and her sister Rebecca alone. Despite her mother's passing, Linda discovered her mother's journals, hidden treasure troves of stories and ideas. She immersed herself in these writings, drawing both comfort and inspiration, and nurtured an ambition to become a journalist or novelist. Yet life rarely followed the script she hoped for. Her father's passing a few years later left Linda, then at the brink of adulthood, to care for Rebecca. The sisters struggled, relying on Linda's waitressing jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Linda had completed high school but postponed college indefinitely. She had no regrets about caring for Rebecca, who was now an enthusiastic high school sophomore dreaming of becoming a veterinarian. But Linda felt the weight of her responsibilities every day. She worked long shifts in various restaurants, often late into the night. Her position at the Grand Solera Hotel was a stroke of luck, better pay, steadier hours, and the chance for bigger tips. She was grateful even if it meant dealing with demanding guests and late-night events. Through it all, Linda tried to maintain her warmth. Her quiet demeanor often made people underestimate her. Yet behind her soft-spoken words lay a tenacity born from hardship, a will that had refused to break under life's pressures. This evening she had arrived 2 hours before the banquet began, ironing her uniform meticulously, reviewing the seating arrangements, double-checking the special dietary requirements listed. Details mattered. At such a high-profile event, guests could be temperamental, especially the wealthy ones who frequented these fundraisers. Some would treat her with gentle politeness, while others barked orders without so much as a please or thank you. Linda had grown used to it. She carried with her always a folded photograph of her mother and father, standing with her sister at a carnival from many years past. That memory, a snapshot of simpler times, reminded Linda of why she persevered. She had goals, too. She longed to return to her dream of writing, maybe even penning a novel that combined her mother's stories with her own experiences. But for now, her main focus was on making ends meet and providing for Rebecca's future. This was the mindset Linda brought to the Grand Solera that night. Keep your head up, do your job, and handle difficulties with grace. Little did she know that this evening would test her patience and fortitude in ways she never imagined. The outcome would set in motion a chain of events linking her life to that of a powerful man, culminating in a confrontation that would ripple through the entire room. Charles Harrington was not born into wealth. He had once been a bright college student from a small, struggling family in Cleveland, Ohio. His ambition burned like wildfire. Driven by a thirst to escape the paycheck-to-paycheck life his parents endured, he threw himself into studies and hustles. By the time he was 28, he had made his first million through clever real estate deals and strategic stock trades. As Harrington's wealth grew, so did his sense of self-importance. He relished the admiration and respect or fear that money commanded. By his mid-30s, he had diversified into hotels, casinos, and restaurants. His penchant for luxurious living was as visible as his gold cufflinks, engraved with the Harrington family crest, a stylized hawk in mid-flight. He married once to a socialite named Annalise Montgomery, but the marriage dissolved within 3 turbulent years. Rumors suggested Harrington's controlling personality and temper were factors. Nevertheless, the millionaire cultivated an image of benevolence through generous donations. He was known to have personally financed entire hospital wings, contributed to scholarship funds, and supported philanthropic causes like the Helios Children's Foundation. In public, he displayed a veneer of affability, but behind the scenes, those who worked for him described Harrington as a relentless taskmaster prone to explosive outbursts if his demands were not met promptly. On this particular night, Harrington arrived at the Grand Solera Hotel with an air of restless impatience. Business had been rocky over the last few weeks. A risky overseas investment teetered on the brink of failure, and his new chain of restaurants faced sabotage rumors from competitors. Harrington prided himself on controlling every detail, but certain factors were slipping from his grasp. Even in the ballroom, he sat rigidly at his assigned table, scanning the crowd. All around him, men in sharp tuxedos and women in flowing gowns socialized without concern. People passed by to greet him with smiles that seemed forced in Harrington's eyes. He responded with curt nods, turning every conversation into a chance to gauge potential allies or threats. He spotted Bill Gates across the room, but made no move to approach. Gates did not know him personally, and Harrington despised the idea of appearing subservient or fawning. Instead, he watched staffers scurry about with trays of hors d'oeuvres and drinks, frowning at the slightest delay. If anything could spark his temper, it was perceived incompetence. Next to him sat his longtime associate, Leonard "Lenny" Fine, a wiry man in his mid-50s who managed Harrington's daily affairs. Lenny tried to engage him in small talk, but Harrington was too distracted by the event's details. When would dinner be served? Why was the host rambling so long about the foundation's accomplishments? Where was the next tray of champagne? Every moment weighed on Harrington's mind. In the back of his thoughts, he was conjuring scenarios about what might go wrong next. The slightest mishap might ignite the spark. He did not realize how soon that spark would come, nor how a single remark from a waitress could unravel so much of the carefully crafted persona he presented to the world. The fundraising dinner program officially began at 7:30. The broadcaster hosting the evening took the podium, delivering a rousing speech about Helios Children's Foundation's impact medical clinics, built in rural Africa educational programs, implemented in Southeast Asia and so forth. A slideshow flickered to life behind him, showing pictures of smiling children, grateful families, and volunteers in bright t-shirts. Rapturous applause echoed through the ballroom, accompanied by the clinking of silverware on china as waitstaff began serving the first course. Linda Parker was among them, maneuvering smoothly between tables. She offered bread rolls and glasses of sparkling water, mindful of the addresses printed on each place card, so that dietary preferences could be honored. At Harrington's table, dinner began with a delicate butternut squash soup garnished with toasted pumpkin seeds. The chef had poured heart and soul into the menu, hoping to impress discerning palates. Yet Harrington barely touched his soup. His mind was elsewhere, calculating financial risk, analyzing potential expansions, and scanning the room for individuals worth courting. Nonetheless, he observed Linda in his peripheral vision. He noticed her polite smile, the way she seemed to remember each table's special requests, and how she respectfully lowered her gaze as she served. Typically, Harrington didn't pay much attention to waitstaff beyond barking instructions, but Linda had a subtle presence that lingered at the edge of one's awareness. As the first course cleared, the host began calling donors to the stage to share personal testimonies or announce significant pledges. Some recognized names took the microphone. Elijah Rutherford promised a $2 million pledge for the foundation's next project in Kenya. Others matched or increased their pledges, bringing the total ever higher. Harrington stood to deliver his speech, announcing a hefty sum. Though the crowd applauded politely, Linda, hovering by a side station, noticed something off about his body language. His shoulders were tight, his jaw clenched. Even as he accepted the mic with a practiced grin, she saw tension radiating off him like waves. She had encountered these cues before in other stressful situations at the restaurant. He concluded his speech to resounding applause, stepping off the stage and heading back to the table. Linda timed her approach to refill his water glass. He looked up sharply as if startled by her sudden presence, and frowned. She murmured a polite apology, stating her intention to refill water. The tension in the moment passed quickly. He grunted something inaudible and turned away. Still, Linda felt a small tremor of dread. Something about Harrington's intensity set her on edge. She quietly prayed that the evening would proceed without incident. She had attended many banquets where wealthy patrons grew sour over minuscule inconveniences. Lukewarm soup, a missing garnish, or a perceived slight from a server. As the night progressed, the main course arrived filet mignon, or seared salmon over a bed of spinach. The hum of conversation grew louder with each glass of wine poured. Waiters drifted in and out, clearing plates, delivering new ones. The evening's formalities continued, but beneath the grand spectacle, tensions simmered. No one could predict the moment when everything would come to a head. It was easy to assume that a waitress and a millionaire existed in separate worlds. But life often tangled paths in unexpected ways, weaving a shared destiny from the unlikeliest threads. For Linda Parker and Charles Harrington, that night at the Grand Solera was one such collision. After the main course, guests were encouraged to mingle. Linda took the opportunity to check on the other tables assigned to her. She offered extra napkins cleared away, finished plates, and brought fresh drinks. Each time she maintained her professional politeness, responding to comments with a nod or a brief, soft-spoken reply. Meanwhile, Harrington found himself cornered by two potential investors in one of his upcoming ventures. They peppered him with inquiries about returns, marketing strategies, and timelines. The conversation was cordial on the surface, but Harrington could sense their skepticism. His frustration mounted with every question he deemed ill-informed or doubting. "I'll have the numbers delivered to your offices by Monday," he snapped at one point, casting a quick glare around for any staff to bring him another drink. Linda, finishing with another table, saw his raised hand and moved forward with her tray, trying to intercept his need before he called out. "Sir, can I get you something?" she asked softly. "Yes." "I need Harrington." Paused, glancing at her name tag. "Linda, is it? I need a Scotch neat. Something decent." Linda nodded. "Right away, Mr. Harrington." She hurried toward the bar on the far side of the ballroom. The line was unexpectedly long. Bartenders worked frantically, pouring cocktails for nearly 100 guests. Linda could feel minutes ticking by as she waited. She could practically hear Harrington's growing impatience from across the room. Finally, Linda returned, glass in hand. She found Harrington engaged in conversation again, but his attention snapped to her the moment she appeared at his side. He took the scotch without a word of thanks, downed half of it, and resumed talking to the investors. Linda retreated, relief flooding her. But she kept a cautious eye on Harrington's table, aware that in large events, small issues often ballooned into controversies if not handled properly. A spilled drink, a late delivery, or an incorrect dish could ignite tempers and overshadow the entire evening. Amid the swirl of elegant dresses and tuxedos, Linda's life and Harrington's life seemed set on a collision course. Each had entered that ballroom under the weight of private struggles, Linda balancing financial burdens and familial responsibilities, Harrington fighting to salvage precarious business deals. The Helios Children's Foundation staff announced dessert, and the final round of speeches was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. A hush of excitement rippled through the crowd. For many, dessert was the highlight. But for Harrington, who was finishing his scotch, no sugar-laden confection could sweeten his brewing anger. Across the room, Linda steeled herself for the final leg of the night, never suspecting the chaotic scene that was about to explode. Dessert was served on immaculate plates, a rich chocolate mousse cake, garnished with raspberries, or a fruit tart for those who preferred a lighter option. Linda delivered plates swiftly, weaving through the tables. She found Harrington in heated discussion with Leonard Fine, their voices low but intense. Harrington's plate was the chocolate mousse cake. Leonard's was the fruit tart. Linda set them down carefully. At first, it seemed like a simple exchange. She placed the mousse cake before Harrington and turned to hand the fruit tart to Leonard. Then, with no warning, Harrington spoke in a sharp tone. "I didn't want the mousse cake," he snapped. Linda paused, tray in hand. "My apologies, sir. That was listed as your preference." "Well, the list is wrong," he hissed. "I specifically told the staff I wanted the fruit tart. Why can't any of you get things right around here?" His voice was not overly loud yet, but the hostility in his words vibrated through the air. Linda's cheeks warmed under the sudden scrutiny. She glanced over to confirm with the table assignment chart on the stand behind him. According to her notes, Harrington had indeed been marked for the mousse cake. "I can certainly bring you the fruit tart if you prefer, Mr. Harrington." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I've been kept waiting all night. First the scotch took forever, and now this. This is supposed to be a top-tier event. Where's the professionalism?" Linda maintained her composure, apologizing again. But Harrington was not finished. He raised his voice loud enough for those at nearby tables to hear. "Is it so hard to follow a simple instruction? I pay thousands, no tens of thousands of dollars to attend events like this. And in return, I get incompetent service. Let me tell you something, if you worked for me, you'd be out of a job right now." His volume drew people's eyes from across the ballroom. The swirl of conversation quieted as curious onlookers turned in their seats, uncertain if they should intervene or wait. Linda felt the sting of humiliation. She had served countless high-profile guests before. Most were demanding, but few stooped to public beratement. She tried to regain control. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Harrington. I'll bring the fruit tart immediately." But Harrington stood up, nearly knocking his chair back. The screech of wood on marble floor caused even more heads to turn. "No, you listen here," he spat. "Maybe if you were more competent, we wouldn't have these problems." This is why he didn't finish his sentence. Lenny stood and placed a hand on Harrington's shoulder, murmuring something that Linda couldn't catch. Harrington shrugged Lenny away. Linda's eyes lowered, turned to hurry off for the replacement dessert. The hush in the area near Harrington's table deepened into a vacuum of tension. Little did Linda know the escalation had only just begun. Harrington's volume and anger had drawn the entire room's attention. Soon, a single remark from her would not only silence him, but unravel much more than anyone anticipated. Behind the partition, separating the dining area from the serving station, Linda placed the offending chocolate mousse plate on a silver tray. Her hands trembled slightly, a swirl of anger and embarrassment coursing through her veins. She took a moment to collect herself. This was not the first time she had encountered a rude customer, but the intensity of Harrington's disdain felt personal. It brought back memories of her childhood. She recalled how her father, Joseph, once confronted a belligerent customer at the local diner, where he occasionally helped out. The man had hurled insults at Joseph for a simple mistake mixing up an order of hash browns with scrambled eggs. Joseph handled it with calm politeness, a gentle smile, and a sincere apology. Later he told Linda, "Some people only know how to lash out. Don't let their anger become your anger." But Linda was human, and the sting of humiliation still lingered. She retrieved a fruit tart from the kitchen. As she waited for the final garnish, her mind roamed to the hardships that shaped her. The abrupt loss of her parents, the scramble to keep Rebecca safe and secure, the long shifts that paid rent but deferred her dreams. The world was not kind to those with little power, little money. People like Harrington, the wealthy, the influential, could snap their fingers and alter a person's destiny in an instant, firing them or barring them from opportunities. With a steadying breath, Linda prepared to re-enter the dining hall. She knew the job demanded a measure of humility, but she also carried a quiet pride. She worked hard for every cent. She was not incompetent despite Harrington's accusations. As Linda emerged, the atmosphere felt thick with anticipation. People watched Harrington's table from the corners of their eyes. The host on stage paused in his announcements, uncertain whether to press on. Linda approached fruit tart in hand and gently placed it in front of Harrington. He did not sit this time. Instead, he glared down at her. "Now was that so hard?" he said through gritted teeth. She murmured a quiet apology, then added, "Here is your fruit tart, Mr. Harrington. I hope it meets your expectations." For a moment, it seemed the worst had passed. But then, as Linda turned away, Harrington's voice rang out again. "You have some nerve, you know that Linda's heart skipped." She glanced back, uncertain. "I'm sorry." He stabbed at the dessert with a fork. "Walking away before I'm finished speaking to you. Do you even realize how to do your job properly?" A cold hush settled over that side of the room. Lenny shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Harrington and the silent onlookers. Linda felt her pride push back against the wave of humiliation. She recalled how not too long ago she was forced to drop out of college to save her sister from foster care. She had learned to swallow her pride for practical reasons. But something about Harrington's barrage awoke a quiet storm within her. As she met his eyes, she felt a lifetime of frustrations coiling inside. She was determined not to let him reduce her to a fearful servant. At the same time, she knew one wrong word could end her job on the spot. In that tense moment, no one could guess the single phrase that would slip from Linda's lips. Words that would hang in the air like a thunderclap, stopping Harrington in his tracks and plunging the entire ballroom into hushed astonishment. Linda could feel her pulse throbbing at her temples. She was acutely aware that all eyes were on her guests. Fellow waiters, reporters. Across the hall, a camera operator affiliated with a local news station had even swung a lens in their direction, sensing the tension and smelling a story. Harrington's expression was that of a predator stalking wounded prey. He waited arms crossed for her response, perhaps anticipating more apologies or stammering excuses, but Linda had reached a threshold. In a controlled, measured voice that carried across the table, she said, "Mr. Harrington, I understand you're upset. But yelling at people who work hard to serve you doesn't make you powerful. It just reveals your insecurities." The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a thunderbolt. The clink of glass and silverware ceased in the vicinity. Several onlookers gasped softly. No one moved. No one spoke. Harrington, for once, seemed momentarily struck dumb. his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't believe a waitress. A mere waitress had addressed him so directly. The moment stretched taut with suspense. Linda felt the last echoes of her own voice reverberate in her ears. A wave of realization swept through her. What had she done? She had dared to call out a man who could have her fired, blacklisted, even humiliated in front of the entire philanthropic community. But there was another undercurrent that those watching could sense. Something about Linda's demeanor, her calm but firm tone, suggested she was not speaking from a place of arrogance, but from genuine conviction. The hush in the ballroom deepened, as if everyone collectively held their breath. For a split second, Linda thought Harrington might strike her or call security or do something equally drastic. His face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth, but no words emerged. The spectacle was so unexpected that even Lenny stood frozen, not knowing how to diffuse the situation. The hush spread like ripples across a pond, until even those at the far end of the room noticed. The host at the podium faltered in his speech, turning his head toward the scene. Bill Gates, in quiet conversation at another table, paused to observe. Guests parted slightly, creating a clearing around Harrington and Linda, as if their confrontation were the center of the universe. Linda stood her ground, though her knees felt weak. She wanted to add something else, an apology or an explanation, but words caught in her throat. Her statement lingered in the air, unstoppable now. Finally, Harrington let out a bitter, scornful laugh. Insecurities. Who do you think you are telling me about insecurities? You're just a waitress. You serve me, and you should learn to keep your mouth shut if you want to keep this job. There was an audible shift in the crowd's energy. Some looked scandalized, others intrigued. A few guests, appalled by Harrington's outburst, exchanged disapproving glances. But Linda didn't budge. She could feel an instinctual determination that overshadowed her fear. She didn't know it yet, but this single act of courage would become the catalyst for revelations and transformations in ways she never imagined. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning unit. It was as though the entire room had fallen into a vacuum, each person waiting to see what would happen next. Then the shift began. A prominent philanthropist at a nearby table leaned forward, eyebrows furrowed in disapproval at Harrington's behavior. Another guest, an actress known for her outspoken defense of workers' rights, pressed her lips together and shook her head. Even the waitstaff, uncertain whether to intervene, hovered at the edge of the scene. Linda's heart hammered, but she stood tall. She could see the swirl of conflicting emotions in Harrington's eyes. Anger, shock, perhaps a flicker of guilt or embarrassment. Lenny, who had attempted to calm Harrington earlier, stepped closer. "Charles," he said quietly, "maybe we should step outside for a moment. Cool off." Harrington shook him off. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I came here to support children in need, and I end up being berated by a waitress." A voice from behind Linda spoke up another server, a veteran staff member named Maureen. "Sir, please lower your voice. This is a charity event." Harrington whirled on Maureen, eyes blazing. But before he could lash out again, a gentle but firm hand came to rest on his arm. It was Elijah Rutherford, the rising tech magnate who had pledged $2 million earlier in the evening. He addressed Harrington in an even tone. "Charles, we appreciate your donations, but this kind of display isn't helping anyone. Let's keep things civilized." The tension soared higher like a string pulled to its breaking point. On the sidelines, cameras captured the confrontation. The local news crew recognized the potential story. A wealthy donor verbally assaults a waitress, creating a scene at a prestigious charity event. Harrington took a deep breath, trying to control himself. He looked around and noticed the stares. He realized this public meltdown could have dire consequences for his reputation. Slowly, he forced a tight-lipped smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Fine," he said, curtly. "I'll apologize if that's what everyone wants." His tone was anything but apologetic. Linda felt a spark of indignation flutter in her chest. She didn't want a hollow apology extracted by social pressure. She wanted genuine respect for her work and her dignity. The host on stage attempted to steer the attention back to the program. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could direct our focus to the concluding portion of our event." But the crowd's attention remained fixed on Harrington and Linda. Finally, as if awakening from a trance, people began murmuring and shifting in their seats. The tension hovered unspent in the hush that followed. Linda swallowed hard. Part of her wanted to walk away, to disappear into the anonymity of the kitchen. But something held her there. She sensed that if she left now, Harrington's tirade would stand unchallenged. She needed closure, or at least some mutual understanding. Never in her life had she felt so simultaneously frightened and resolute. She suspected the next few moments would shape her future in ways she couldn't yet fathom. A discreet cough broke the silence, followed by the scraping of a chair. A man Linda recognized as Henry Coleman, the founder of Helios Children's Foundation, stepped forward. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, and radiated a sense of calm authority. Charles Henry began addressing Harrington with the measured tone of someone who had navigated countless corporate storms. "We value your contributions to our cause. But let's not forget why we are here. These galas are meant to remind us of our shared humanity. Linda is a member of our team tonight, working hard to make this event a success." Harrington opened his mouth to respond, but Henry raised a hand, continuing gently. "You've always shown generosity, but generosity is also about kindness and empathy. I'd appreciate it if we could move forward without further hostility. This event is for the children, after all." For a moment, Harrington seemed to weigh his options. He could escalate the conflict, or he could swallow his pride. Meanwhile, Linda looked at Henry with gratitude. She had never met him personally, but his words felt like a lifeline. Harrington cleared his throat. "I'm aware this is for charity," he said, attempting to maintain composure. "But I was disrespected first. I am not used to being spoken to in that manner." Linda felt a fresh flush rise to her cheeks. She couldn't remain silent. "I understand, Mr. Harrington, that you're not used to staff speaking up. But respect goes both ways. I serve this event with sincerity, and I expect at minimum decency in return." Her voice was quiet, but resolute. The crowd pressed in closer, forming a ring around them. Some people looked astonished by her directness. Others wore expressions of approval. A tension-induced headache throbbed at Linda's temples, but she wouldn't back down. Slowly, Harrington nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. He was clearly wrestling with his own pride. "All right," he said, eventually turning his gaze to Linda. "I shouldn't have raised my voice. I apologize." He paused, swallowing hard. "For insulting you." It was not the warmest apology, but it was a notable concession coming from a man like Harrington. Linda managed a small nod, acknowledging his words. Behind him, Lenny exhaled in relief, as if he'd been holding his breath for several minutes. At that moment, a wave of applause rippled through the onlookers. It was tentative at first, but then it grew louder, as though the entire room had collectively decided to hail the cessation of hostilities. Even the host at the podium tried to salvage the evening's mood with a light-hearted remark about how tonight's real winners were the children. Harrington sat down slowly, rubbing his temples as if exhausted. Linda, still processing the ordeal, excused herself from the center of attention. She retreated behind the banquet tables, a swirl of relief and residual shock coursing through her. Moments later, a colleague whispered, "Linda, are you okay?" She nodded, but the weight of what just happened pressed on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just a personal triumph over indignity, but a significant juncture that might alter the course of her life, and Harrington's too. As the event program resumed, the lingering undercurrent of excitement and tension persisted. Attendees tried to return to casual conversation, but the hush near Harrington's table didn't fully dissipate. Everyone sensed that a line had been crossed tonight between wealth and humility, power and dignity, status and self-worth. Linda, still on duty, continued to circulate among the tables, refilling water glasses and clearing empty dishes. She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. A small part of her questioned whether she had overstepped, worried she might face repercussions. But the more substantial part of her stood by her words. She had refused to be belittled, and that refusal mattered. During a brief lull, Henry Coleman approached her. "Linda," he said kindly, "I just wanted to see how you're holding up." She mustered a smile. "I'll be all right, sir. Thank you for standing up for me. That meant a lot." Henry nodded. "You handled yourself with remarkable poise. I'm sorry this happened at our event. If you face any fallout with your employer, let me know. I value fairness, and I'd be happy to provide a recommendation." Her eyes widened in gratitude. She thanked him, feeling a rush of relief that someone of his stature saw her side of the story. Maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't be summarily fired tomorrow. Meanwhile, across the room, Harrington was still nursing his bruised ego. Lenny and a couple of other associates tried to comfort him, suggesting that the damage to his image might be temporary, if handled correctly. Someone even proposed spinning the incident into a narrative about how Harrington was passionate about philanthropic causes. Harrington scarcely listened. His mind churned with memories he'd long repressed, his own impoverished upbringing, when people with money and power spoke down to him. He'd vowed never to be on the receiving end of that dynamic again. Somehow, in his pursuit of fortune, he had become the very type of person he once despised. Linda's words about insecurities had cut too close to the bone. By the time dessert plates were cleared, guests began to trickle out, exchanging farewells and polite compliments. The local news crew conducted quick interviews with a few high-profile donors, quietly hoping to catch Linda for a statement. She managed to evade them, slipping out of the ballroom for a moment's respite. In a secluded hallway, Linda finally allowed herself to lean against a wall and exhale. Her entire body felt drained. Could this cost her her job? Would Harrington, with all his connections, see to it that she never worked in a high-end venue again? Or would he let it go? Perhaps even admire her candor in hindsight? With these thoughts circling her mind, she was surprised to find that in the core of her being, she felt oddly peaceful. She had spoken up not just for herself, but symbolically for every undervalued worker subjected to condescension. And in doing so, she'd shown that sometimes the presumed weak aren't as powerless as the world believes. Long after the band had played its final notes and the last notes of conversation began to fade into the cold Manhattan night, Linda Parker remained behind in the cavernous ballroom. While most of the staff was already stacking chairs and collecting linens, she needed a quiet moment to gather her things and her thoughts. The night's events played over in her mind, like a spool of film, each frame vivid with tension relief and an unexpected revelation of courage. At last she headed to the staff room, her pulse still uneven. She slipped off her vest, her name tag, and then carefully folded her apron on a wooden bench. It should have been a routine gesture, the final sign-off to another long shift. But this time her heart trembled. She couldn't forget the look on Charles Harrington's face when she'd spoken her piece. She couldn't forget the hush that had enveloped the room, as if all the city's noise had died in a single breath. Walking out through the back corridor toward the employee exit, Linda half expected to see only the empty alley and scattered trash cans. She yearned for the anonymity of the subway ride home, to slip back into her everyday routine, with her sister letting the intense confrontation recede into memory. But waiting near the heavy metal door was a tall, wiry figure with a familiar uncertainty in his eyes. Leonard Lenny Fine. He wore a dark overcoat, his stance betraying a kind of restless resolve. "Linda," he said with a delicate nod, as though testing the sound of her name. "I'm sorry to bother you, but Charles asked if he could speak with you before you go." A cool draft seeped under the exit door, ruffling Linda's hair. She felt her stomach tighten. Part of her wanted to refuse to avoid any further entanglement with the man whose voice had thundered at her across the ballroom. Another part driven by curiosity, or perhaps something akin to compassion, propelled her to follow Lenny out into the crisp night air. They rounded a corner into a recessed loading dock, dimly lit by a single overhead lamp that flickered every few seconds. There, leaning against the rough concrete wall, stood Charles Harrington. Gone was the domineering stature. In its place lingered a hesitant figure, arms crossed over his chest as if shielding himself from the cold or from the vulnerability of the moment. His breath condensed into faint plumes. At the sound of footsteps, he straightened, lowering his arms. "Linda," he began, voice subdued. "Thank you for coming out here. I wanted to see you alone." 1,000 thoughts collided in Linda's mind. How easily he had belittled her, the silent judgment of onlookers, the sting of tears she'd fought to suppress. At the same time, she remembered his expression when he first realized the entire room was watching him, the flicker of embarrassment that suggested a man not entirely at ease with his own behavior. She had seen that type of shame before in customers who realized they'd gone too far, but this was different, heavier, as though it carried a deeper wound. "I know you have every right to be angry," Harrington continued, his words coming slowly. "And I don't blame you if you hate me now, but I asked Lenny to bring you here to apologize. Properly." Linda's gaze flicked to Lenny. He stood off to the side, shoulders slightly hunched against the chilly air, allowing Harrington to take the lead. She returned her attention to the millionaire in front of her. Even in the faint light, she could see the exhaustion etched on his face, fine lines on his brow, and a hollowness in his eyes. He looked older, more mortal than the imposing figure at the banquet table. "I'm not proud of how I treated you tonight," Harrington said, voice catching. "Or the way I've handled stress recently." I snapped. "You were right, yelling at staff, belittling people who are only trying to do their jobs. It doesn't prove I'm in control. It shows weakness." Linda felt an unexpected tug of empathy. She had encountered arrogance at other upscale events, but never had she seen a patron, especially a man of Harrington's status, admit fault so plainly. "Mr. Harrington," she began. He raised a hand, not in command, but almost in supplication. "Please call me Charles. I owe you that much. Tmos." Her lips pressed together briefly. It felt strange addressing him by his first name, but she obliged. "Charles, you surprised me tonight. People don't usually apologize like this." A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. Let's just say that you made me see something in myself I've been avoiding. I was no stranger to hardship when I was younger. But somewhere along the line I started believing that wealth gave me the right to expect the world to bow to my wishes. You reminded me that respect is earned, not bought. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a folded piece of paper. Carefully, he extended it toward her. The overhead lamp's glow revealed a typed letterhead: The Helios Children's Foundation. This, he explained softly, is a confirmation of an additional donation I've made in your name above what I pledged earlier. It's an attempt to right my wrong, though I know it might not erase what happened. Linda's eyes locked on the slip of paper. She had no illusions about money healing, emotional wounds, but a donation, especially one benefiting children, was far from empty. She remembered her parents, how they taught her that generosity and kindness were cornerstones of true humanity. For a moment she was overwhelmed, uncertain how to respond. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally, her voice a hushed whisper. "No," Harrington conceded. "But I wanted to. I also wanted you to know." He paused, clearing his throat. The hesitation was laden with genuine concern. "If there's any fallout at your job from tonight, you let me know. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you from repercussions." A subtle warmth spread through Linda's chest, relieving the knot of anxiety that had tightened there ever since the confrontation. She realized in that instant that the man before her wasn't just making amends. He was grappling with his own past, his own moral compass. Maybe this moment marked a turning point for him, for her, and perhaps for everyone who had witnessed their clash. "I appreciate that," she said softly. She glanced at Lenny, who nodded encouragingly, as if to confirm Harrington's sincerity. Turning back, she reached out her hand. "Thank you, Charles." He accepted her handshake, and in that brief contact, Linda felt a rush of understanding pass between them, a shared recognition of flawed humanity. There next to crates and dumpsters under flickering light, they stood as equals for a moment, both shaped by life's challenges in ways the other could scarcely imagine. Harrington exhaled shakily, releasing her hand. "Thank you for hearing me out, and for the lesson you taught me." Unable to find words, Linda offered a small, genuine smile. She stepped back, tucking the donation slip into her jacket. In some other life, they might never have met. But tonight they had collided like two tectonic plates, causing a ripple that might subtly alter the landscape of their futures. When Linda finally walked away from the loading dock, she felt the cold air pricking her cheeks, yet her spirit was inexplicably lighter. She didn't feel triumphant, nor did she feel vindictive. Instead, she carried a sense of hard-won clarity, as though she'd glimpsed a deeper truth about power, pride, and humanity. Behind her, Charles Harrington lingered, staring at the spot where Linda had disappeared around the corner. In the hush of the alley, he seemed to stand at a crossroads, if not in the physical sense, then certainly in the moral one. And while neither he nor Linda could rewrite the events of the night, they had taken a step toward something rare and profound, the kind of mutual respect born from honesty, empathy, and the willingness to confront their own flaws. The following days saw a ripple effect from that fateful confrontation. The local news stations aired brief clips of the incident, though they lacked the audio that would have revealed Linda's decisive remark. Instead, the footage showed a tense exchange and Harrington's visible anger. Various guests who had been in attendance gave interviews, some defending Harrington's philanthropic track record, others praising Linda's courage. On social media, public opinion was divided. Some lambasted Harrington as a prime example of entitled wealth. Others pointed out his charitable contributions, suggesting he was merely having an off night. More intriguing, though, were the voices celebrating Linda's stand. Stories of overworked, underpaid servers shared their own experiences of humiliation by customers lauding Linda as a quiet hero. Meanwhile, Linda's life took small but meaningful turns. Word reached the Grand Solera's management about her composure that night, and rather than facing a reprimand, Linda found herself praised. She was offered opportunities to train new staff, an acknowledgement of her professionalism under pressure. She continued caring for Rebecca, who soon learned of Linda's unexpected fame through classmates who had seen the news clips. Rather than boasting, Linda remained humble, even as a few curious journalists contacted her for an interview. She declined most, not wanting to turn her personal stand into a spectacle. Across town, Harrington faced damage control for his public image. Yet in private, the incident appeared to spark a shift in him. According to rumors from those close to him, he began re-evaluating his behavior towards staff in his companies, hosting more inclusive meetings, listening to employee complaints, and instituting better working conditions. Though he never publicly confirmed it, some whispered that Linda's words had left a lasting mark on the Millionaire. Henry Coleman of the Helios Children's Foundation reached out to Linda personally, inviting her to volunteer in upcoming charity events if her schedule allowed. He recognized her passion and fortitude qualities he believed would benefit the foundation. Linda, enamored with the prospect of helping children in need, considered the offer seriously. In the end, the entire confrontation didn't become a fairy tale transformation of Harrington into a philanthropic angel, or Linda into a globally celebrated figure. Life seldom works in neat story arcs. Instead, the event served as a microcosm of social dynamics, how a flashpoint can reveal hidden insecurities and fundamental truths. For Harrington, it was a lesson in humility. For Linda, an affirmation that standing up for oneself can yield unexpected respect. And so both of them continued their separate journeys, each subtly altered by that night when a millionaire yelled at a waitress, and she uttered a single phrase that silenced an entire room. Their paths might never cross again, but neither would forget the evening that forced them and everyone around them to confront the fragile barriers of wealth, power, and human dignity. Thank you for joining me on this journey of hidden truths and unexpected transformations. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that a single voice can challenge injustice and a single moment can spark change, then I invite you to share this message. Every day we meet people who work diligently behind the scenes, often overlooked or underappreciated. Their dignity and self-worth deserve acknowledgement. Let's keep this conversation alive. Share this video with friends who might need inspiration in moments of discouragement. Leave a like if you believe in treating each other with respect, regardless of status or circumstance. And of course, don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories that shine a light on our shared humanity. Together, we can remember that kindness and empathy hold power far beyond what money can buy. Thank you, and see you in the next video.